This recipe is an example of something called anti-resonant flavor chemistry, specifically the tart cherries with the Sichuan peppercorns that combine to taste almost nothing like either of the individual ingredients. This is a molecular food topic that's introduced in the second volume of my cookbook. The flavor of these is delicious and interesting just by themselves, but even better when you combine them with spicy sauce, as explained in the text here.
I've assembled the ingredients. I've got somewhere between 50 and 60 grams of shallots, 2 teaspoons of Sichuan peppercorns, and 150 grams of cherries, which I've already used the pitter on and removed all the pits from. You can chop these up by hand if you want, or you can use a food processor. I'm actually going to use a food processor in this case because we don't need precision and it just makes the life easier. Once the pan gets hot, we'll put a couple tablespoons of oil in there. Begin cooking the shallots. Okay, after a minute, two, there's some browning because I'm doing this on a high heat, as I mentioned. It's now I'm going to turn the heat down from 8 to about 6, and I'm going to add those cherries that we chopped up the food processor. And the Sichuan peppercorns that were ground up in a spice mill. You want to make sure that you don't have any big lumps in there. Make sure that they're ground up well. And then finally, about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Remember, this is for a good amount of meat. And we're going to continue cooking this on the heat setting of 6 for a few minutes here. As you're cooking it, you can see there's a lot of liquid coming off these cherries and the shallots too. The point here is you want to cook this until you get rid of this liquid, until you get it to be fairly dry. And after a few minutes, this is what you end up with. It's mostly dry. I weighed this, and it's about 120 grams, which is about what you should end up with. If it's a little bit over or a little bit under, that's okay. But it shouldn't be burnt at all, and it shouldn't be wet. It should just be quite dry like this. Now we're going to refrigerate this and begin with the meat. I have the meat ready to go through the grinder. I've got 100 grams of what looks like bacon on the camera here, I realize, but this is actually uncured and unsmoked pork belly that's been sliced just like you were going to use it, just like it was bacon rather. And I've got 400 grams of turkey breast scallops. And now I'm just going to cut these up into cubes and pass them to the grinder. Into a bowl here, I've weighed out 50 grams of breadcrumbs, and now I'm adding the same amount, 50 grams of heavy cream. And the cherry Sichuan peppercorn mixture from earlier. And we're going to mix this up first. We want to get this thoroughly mixed together first before we add the meat, because then we'll minimize the amount of mixing around of the meat. We don't want to beat the meat into a state of where it's tough. We want the meatballs to be tender, so do all of your mixing of these ingredients first before you add the meat. And we add the meat in. We'll gently mix this together. You want it to be homogeneous, but don't beat it to a pulp, otherwise your meatballs will be hard as rocks. One of the mistakes people make in making meatballs is they overmix the mixture. Okay, I'm lifting it up and I'm mixing it gently, almost like making a souffle. Okay. A little bit more mixing. Now you roll these out into about 15 meatballs, and you can dust them with flour like this, and then you kind of jostle them around a little bit on a plate to coat the other sides with the flour, just like this, and then we're going to cook them in 2 batches. And you can use whatever oil you like for this. I'm using unrefined sunflower oil. This is a special ingredient. It's common in Russia. It's not very commonly seen anywhere else. You can use olive oil if you want. This has some unusual flavor characteristics that really complement this. But you may not be able to get that. I talk about more about that in the second volume of my cookbook. And begin getting some browning going on these. As with other meatball recipes I've showed you, as soon as you get some little bit of initial cooking on the surface, move them off to the sides like this, because then they'll cook evenly. The center of the pan is the hottest, the edges are very even, and you want them to cook all at the same time, of course. And just keep watching them, monitoring them, and turn the pan around once in a while like this, so if there's any unevenness in your stove, the oil will drain from one side to the other. You won't end up with some of the meatballs cooked in a pool of oil and the others cooked in a dry pan. And after a few minutes, when you've got them reasonably well browned on all sides, kind of scoot them to the center of the pan, and now we add this mixture of red wine and water. Cover them up, turn the heat off, and let them steam like this for just 3 or 4 more minutes, maybe 5 minutes tops. Make sure they're cooked all the way through.
If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. If you like my videos, look for my cookbook, now available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other internet bookseller sites. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.